Welcome to Compact Murder from CompactHistories.com, where we take a look at real murder cases, assassinations and serial killers in short, bite-sized episodes. This is episode 90, The Son of Sam. David Berkowitz was born Richard David Falco in Brooklyn on the 1st of June 1953. His biological mother, Elizabeth Broder, had become involved with Joseph Kleinman while separated from her husband, Tony Falco. Kleinman was married, and the circumstances surrounding the pregnancy were complicated by secrecy and pressure. Within days of his birth, the child was adopted by Nathan and Pearl Berkowitz, a Jewish couple who owned a hardware shop and lived in the Bronx. They renamed him David Richard Berkowitz and raised him as their only child. Accounts of Berkowitz's early behaviour rely heavily on relatives, neighbours and his own later statements, making simple explanations dangerous. He was remembered as intelligent but difficult, prone to anger, theft, bullying and destructive pranks. He struggled socially and sometimes felt rejected by other children. None of this made his later violence inevitable, and millions of troubled children never become violent offenders. What it does establish is a pattern of resentment, isolation and poor emotional control that existed long before the shootings. The central relationship of Berkowitz's childhood was with his adoptive mother. Pearl died from breast cancer in 1967 when David was 14. Her death appears to have affected him deeply, although later retellings sometimes turn it into an all-purpose explanation for his crimes. Nathan subsequently remarried, and the couple eventually moved to Florida, leaving the young Berkowitz increasingly detached from family life. He graduated from Christopher Columbus High School in 1971 and enlisted in the United States Army shortly afterwards. Berkowitz served until 1974, including a posting in South Korea. Military life gave him routine, but did not resolve his alienation. After his honourable discharge, he returned to New York, took several modest jobs and attended classes briefly. He also traced his biological mother and learnt the truth about his adoption. Discovering that she was alive, and hearing the painful circumstances of his birth, appears to have intensified his sense of abandonment rather than providing the identity he sought. After leaving the army, Berkowitz found work as a security guard, taxi driver and postal employee. He attended Bronx Community College briefly and lived in New Rochelle before moving to Yonkers. These ordinary details later complicated public understanding. The future killer was not visibly monstrous, merely an isolated young man whose inner life remained concealed. By the mid-1970s, Berkowitz was living alone and drifting between addresses. He eventually settled at 35 Pine Street in Yonkers and worked as a postal sorter. To colleagues and neighbours, he could seem quiet, awkward or irritable rather than obviously dangerous. Privately, however, he developed fantasies of revenge and nurtured grievances against women, couples and the world around him. He later claimed to have started fires and committed knife attacks, although parts of his account remain unverified. What is certain is that he acquired a powerful revolver and began turning fantasy into planned violence. The weapon Berkowitz chose was a .44 caliber Charter Arms Bulldog revolver. It was compact enough to conceal, but fired ammunition capable of causing catastrophic injuries. His possession of it marked a decisive change. Rather than attacking people he knew or confronting those he blamed for his unhappiness, he could approach strangers, fire quickly, and disappear into New York's streets. The apparent randomness of the attacks would later become one of the investigation's greatest problems. Berkowitz later said that he had attacked women with a knife on Christmas Eve 1975, but the account was never tested through a prosecution and remains difficult to verify today. On the 29th of July 1976, 18-year-old Donna Lauria and 19-year-old Jody Valenti were sitting in Valenti's car outside Lauria's home in the Pelham Bay area of the Bronx. A man approached, drew a gun from a paper bag and fired. Lauria was killed, and Valenti was wounded in the thigh. The surviving witness supplied a description. but there was no recognizable motive, relationship or dispute to guide detectives towards the gunman. Nearly 3 months passed before another attack. On the 23rd of October, Carl Denaro and Rosemary Keenan were sitting in a parked car in Flushing, Queens, when shots smashed through its windows. Denaro suffered a severe head wound, while Keenan escaped with injuries from broken glass. Because Denaro wore his hair long, investigators later wondered whether the attacker had mistaken him for a woman. At the time, however, the damaged bullets and different location prevented police from confidently linking the shooting to Lauria's murder. On the 27th of November, teenagers Donna DeMasi and Joanne Lamino returned from a film and stood talking outside Lamino's home in Floral Park. A stranger approached as though seeking directions, then opened fire. Both survived, but Lamino was left paralysed. Witness descriptions differed from earlier accounts, reinforcing the possibility that police were dealing with unrelated offenders. The gunman benefited from separate precincts, holding separate fragments of the same story. The attacks became unmistakably lethal again in the early hours of the 30th of January 1977. Christine Freund and John Deal had been sitting in a car near the Forest Hills station in Queens after visiting a cinema. Gunfire struck both of them. Deal survived, but Freund died in hospital. Ballistics showed that the weapon was a .44 caliber revolver, and newspapers began referring to an unknown .44 caliber killer. On the 8th of March, 20-year-old Columbia University student Virginia Voskerikian was shot in the head while walking home in Forest Hills, close to the Freund crime scene. She raised her books in a desperate attempt to shield herself, but was killed. Investigators could now see a pattern involving young women, sudden attacks and the same unusual caliber. Yet they still lacked a name, a reliable description, or any clear connection between the victims. Berkowitz had created fear, but notoriety soon became part of what he wanted. Following Virginia Voskerikian's murder, the New York Police Department brought detectives together in a dedicated investigation commonly known as Operation Omega. Deputy Inspector Timothy Dowd directed a rapidly expanding task force that eventually involved around 200 officers. Detectives compared ballistics, re-examined witness accounts, and tried to predict where the gunman might appear next. The scale was impressive, but the killer selected strangers across different boroughs, leaving investigators with few conventional leads. At about 3 a.m, on the 17th of April 1977, 18-year-old Valentina Suriani and 20-year-old Alexander Esau were sitting in a car near Suriani's home in the Bronx. Berkowitz fired through the vehicle. Suriani died at the scene, while Esau died later in hospital. Near their bodies, police discovered a handwritten message addressed to Captain Joseph Borelli, a member of the investigation. Its theatrical language changed the public identity of the murderer. The writer called himself the son of Sam, mocked the police, and promised that the killings would continue. Until then, newspaper descriptions had centered on the caliber of the weapon. The new name transformed an unidentified shooter into a sinister character with a voice, a mythology, and an apparent appetite for attention. Police initially withheld much of the letter, but details emerged, and the nickname spread through the press. In late May, Daily News columnist Jimmy Breslin received another letter. Its author referred to earlier crimes, taunted investigators, and used the same grotesque, performative style. The letter was handed to police, who found it potentially useful but not decisive. When portions appeared in print, circulation soared. Berkowitz had learnt that a few pages of rambling threats could magnify the effects of every shot, frightening people far beyond the neighbourhoods in which he attacked. The letters complicated psychiatric speculation. Their timing and presentation showed calculation, as Berkowitz frightened the public while hiding behind a character of his construction. The name Sam came from Berkowitz's Yonkers neighbours, the Carr family. Sam Carr owned a black Labrador named Harvey, whose barking infuriated Berkowitz. Before the murders ended, Berkowitz sent threatening letters to the family and shot the dog, wounding it. After his arrest, he claimed that Harvey was possessed by a demon that transmitted orders to kill. He later acknowledged that this supernatural explanation was invented. It should therefore be understood as manipulation and self-dramatization, not reliable evidence that a dog controlled his actions. While the task force studied handwriting and followed thousands of tips, Berkowitz attacked again. On the 26th of June, 17-year-old Judy Placido and 20-year-old Salvatore Lupo were sitting in a car after leaving a Queen's discotheque. Both were shot, but survived. Their inability to identify the assailant preserved his advantage. By then, however, New Yorkers knew the nickname, the weapon, and the pattern. Each quiet street, parked car, or late-night journey seemed potentially dangerous, setting the stage for a summer of extraordinary fear. New York entered the summer of 1977 already under enormous strain. The city was recovering from a fiscal crisis, crime was a constant political concern, and a blackout in July produced looting and disorder. Against this background, the son of Sam Case acquired a power greater than its casualty figures alone could explain. The killer seemed able to appear anywhere, select anyone, and vanish without leaving a meaningful trail. His victims were often described as young women with long dark hair or couples sitting in parked cars. The pattern was never absolute, but press coverage turned it into a set of public warnings. Some women cut or dyed their hair, while couples reconsidered where they met and how late they remained outside. Discotheques and bars were crowded, yet the journey home carried a new anxiety. Police advised caution without being able to say precisely who was in danger. The newspapers competed intensely. Front pages carried developments, rumours, psychological speculation and reproductions of the killer's words. The Daily News and New York Post experienced enormous sales as readers searched for information, but the coverage also gave Berkowitz the audience he desired. His chosen name was repeated until it became more familiar than those of Donna Lauria, Christine Freund, Virginia Voskerichian, Valentina Suriani and Alexander Esau. Sensationalism made him a celebrity while families mourned largely outside the spotlight. Operation Omega processed letters and investigated possible suspects, gun owners and reported sightings. Conflicting witness descriptions created confusion. Some witnesses recalled dark hair, others blonde hair. Estimates of height, build and age varied. The attacks occurred in the Bronx, Queens, and eventually Brooklyn, requiring detectives from different areas to coordinate evidence gathered under difficult conditions. Even the distinctive weapon did not immediately identify its owner because thousands of similar revolvers were in circulation. Police visibility increased through patrols. Yet protecting an entire city from a mobile attacker was impossible. Every false report added pressure to an overwhelmed investigation. Berkowitz exploited the anniversary of his first recognised murder. In the early hours of the 31st of July, he approached a car parked near Shore Parkway in Brooklyn. Inside were 20-year-old Stacy Moskowitz and her companion Robert Violante, who had been on their first date. Berkowitz fired into the car. Violante was gravely wounded and permanently lost sight in one eye. Moskowitz suffered a devastating head injury and died in hospital. The shooting brought the confirmed toll to 6 dead and 7 wounded. It also extended the series into a new borough, intensifying fears that the killer was moving unpredictably across the city. Yet this final attack contained something earlier scenes had not produced, an ordinary municipal record connected to a nearby vehicle. The clue appeared almost trivial beside the mass of ballistics reports, letters and witness statements. Properly followed, however, it would lead investigators directly to a quiet postal worker in Yonkers. Near the scene of the Moskowitz and Violante shooting, local resident Casilia Davis had noticed a police officer issuing a parking ticket to a yellow Ford Galaxy positioned close to a fire hydrant. She later saw a man near the vehicle who appeared to be carrying a dark object. Soon afterwards, she heard gunfire. Frightened and initially reluctant to become involved, Davis waited several days before reporting what she had seen. Detectives checked the tickets issued in the area that night. One belonged to David Berkowitz of 35 Pine Street, Yonkers. The discovery did not instantly prove that he was the gunman, but it provided a specific person and vehicle that could be investigated. Detective James Justice contacted Yonkers Police, where the name Berkowitz was already familiar because of a bitter neighbourhood dispute involving Sam Carr's family and their dog. The ticket was more than routine. It narrowed the investigation to one traceable car and transformed its owner into the prime suspect. Berkowitz had complained repeatedly about Harvey's barking, sent hostile letters and, in April 1977, shot and wounded the animal. Sam Carr's daughter, Wheat Carr, recognised Berkowitz's name when the NYPD inquiry reached Yonkers and explained the history. The references to Sam, together with the threats and the unexplained presence of Berkowitz's car near the final murder, made the connection increasingly difficult to dismiss. Investigators placed his apartment and vehicle under observation. On the 10th of August, detectives approached the Ford outside Berkowitz's building. Inside, they saw a .44 caliber Charter Arms Bulldog revolver, ammunition and material suggesting that he might be preparing another attack. Police waited for him to emerge from his apartment, then surrounded him as he entered the car. Detective John Falotico was officially credited with the arrest. Berkowitz surrendered calmly, reportedly greeting the officers with words to the effect that they had finally caught him. The revolver was soon linked to the shootings. During questioning, Berkowitz confessed to the attacks and adopted the bizarre story that a demon associated with Sam Carr's dog had commanded him to kill. The explanation captured public attention, but it also allowed Berkowitz to present himself as the servant of an outside force. In 1979, he publicly admitted that the demonic possession story had been a hoax. Later claims that he belonged to a murderous cult, or that accomplices committed some attacks, changed repeatedly, and were never established in court. Police searched Berkowitz's apartment and recovered writings reflecting obsessions with fires, neighbours and violence. Investigators considered whether he might be connected to numerous arsons, although his boasts were difficult to verify. The immediate case, by contrast, rested on powerful evidence: the weapon, his presence near the final scene, the letters, and his confession. The arrest ended the shootings, but it did not end the argument over responsibility. That would move into psychiatric examinations, courtrooms, and decades of imprisonment. After his arrest, Berkowitz underwent several psychiatric evaluations. Despite his strange claims and disturbing behaviour, examiners found him competent to stand trial, meaning he understood the proceedings and could assist his defence. His lawyers considered an insanity plea, but Berkowitz chose to admit responsibility. On the 8th of May 1978, he pleaded guilty to 6 counts of second-degree murder and acknowledged the related shootings. The legal process was not entirely orderly. At a court appearance later that month, Berkowitz caused a disturbance and shouted abuse about Stacy Moskowitz, prompting another assessment of his mental fitness. He was again found competent. On the 12th of June, judges imposed 6 consecutive sentences of 25 years to life, 1 for each murder. He was therefore eligible for parole after 25 years, but consecutive life terms expressed the scale of the crimes and made release highly unlikely. Berkowitz was sent into New York's maximum security prison system and spent time at Attica, where another prisoner slashed his throat in 1979. He survived and was later transferred through other institutions. During the late 1980s, he announced that he had become an evangelical Christian, rejected the name Son of Sam, and sometimes called himself the Son of Hope. He has participated in prison religious work and expressed remorse, although survivors and victims' relatives are under no obligation to accept his account of redemption. He first became eligible for parole in 2002. boards repeatedly refused release, citing the severity of the murders and their continuing consequences. His 12th appearance ended in denial in May 2024. In 2026, he declined another scheduled hearing and remained imprisoned at Shawangunk Correctional Facility. The enduring attention given to his religious claims and interviews illustrates the same imbalance that shaped the original coverage. The killer continues to receive a platform, while the lives of his victims require deliberate effort to remember. The case also produced a major legal legacy. New York enacted legislation designed to prevent criminals from profiting through books, films, or other accounts of their offences. Known as the Son of Sam law, it directed relevant income towards victims. In 1991, the United States Supreme Court struck down that version as an unconstitutional restriction on speech because it was too broad and content-based. New York subsequently adopted revised measures aimed at preserving compensation rights without the same defect. Berkowitz's mythology has encouraged recurring theories about cults and accomplices, but no alternative account has displaced his guilty pleas, confession, and the physical evidence against him. The clearest legacy is not a supernatural mystery or a criminal celebrity. It is 6 murdered people, 7 wounded survivors, families altered permanently, and a city taught how easily fear can be amplified when violence, publicity, and an offender's hunger for recognition converge. Offenders exploit unanswered questions by offering explanations. Careful history must resist those distractions and return attention to evidence, victims, and lasting consequences. That brings us to the end of this episode of Compact Murder, part of the Compact Histories Network. If you enjoyed it, please follow or subscribe wherever you're listening so you don't miss any future episodes, and consider leaving a rating or review, as it really helps new listeners find the show. You can find more episodes at compactmurder.com, where you can also explore our other podcasts covering biographies, history, disasters, warfare, and mysteries. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Pinterest. Finally, please consider supporting the show directly by buying us a coffee. Head on over to compacthistories.com/murdercoffee to see how. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.